Well, hello, and welcome to another lesson of the Content Modeling Weekly course. I am Marcelo Lewin, the Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me right there, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. Send me questions, comments, ideas. I'd love to hear from you. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Now, this is part one of a four-part series where we're getting back to the basics. We're going to talk about some content modeling principles that I think are very important for you to understand. And that I highly recommend you implement when you're creating your content model or you're working with your team on that content model. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about 5 specific principles. The first one being design it first, then work with a diverse team, make it scalable, keep it updated, and think single source of truth. So let's go ahead and jump in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show my screen here. And let's close that up and let's start. Obviously, this is available on demand under the bonus material, so you'll be able to get the Miro board there. But let's start with the first one, which is design it first. And what do I mean by that? And this is, I think, where most people that jump into a Headless CMS project, they make the biggest mistake, which is they jump in and they create the content types directly into a Headless CMS. They don't design it first. They don't talk through this process first. Here's the recommended process that I use all the time with all the consulting that I do and when I'm creating content models. We start by designing it first. And designing it means that we create a content model. I use Miro. You can use whatever tool works for you, but we create it in a tool that is not connected to any Headless CMS. So we come up with a content model that is, we're going to talk about so many principles here, but that is scalable, supports single source of truth, so on and so forth. But we created in Miro with a team, and then we go back and forth here between design and team approval. Once we feel, hey, this is a good content model that truly represents our content architecture in the organization, then and only then do we jump into a Headless CMS and create the content types in there. Then we go ahead and tell the authors to go test it because we want to make sure the authoring experience is good for them. Because even though from a design perspective, it may match and be a great design, and it follows all the principles, some things may fall apart here. That's what happens. That's the reality of life. Then we also, at the same time, ask the developers to check it from their perspective. Notice how we have authors and developers testing, not just authors, not just developers. We'll get the feedback, apply any changes, and we'll loop back and forth until we're all happy from a content architect perspective, an authoring perspective, and a developer perspective. We're happy with what that model looks like, and we're ready for coding. Then, and only then, do we jump in and start developing for the delivery channel that we want. And I think this is the biggest place where people make mistakes, is they skip design, team approval. They just jump into the Headless CMS and start creating content types as if they were tables. And they're not tables. Content types are much different than a database table. So you really have to think about the content in your organization, the relationship between all of these content types, so on and so forth. And then what you're going to get out of your deliverable in the design phase is going to be a content model. This is just an example, obviously, that may have multiple content types, some components with relationships to all the content types, and everybody agrees, yeah, this is truly our representation of our content in our organization. So just to reiterate, design it first. Start with that in mind. Don't jump into this portion, because some people will jump into here and directly go into development. And to me, this is, if you do that, you're definitely going to run into issues later on, because your authors are going to go, no, this doesn't work for me. And then you're going to run into scalability issues, which we're going to be talking about next. Perhaps you'll run into single source of truth issues as well. So design it first. All right. Also, if you have any questions for those of you watching live, please feel free to type them in the comments and I'll answer them for you. All right. So the next principle is work with a diverse team. And this is where I think mistake number 2 happens in organizations. They immediately think of content modeling as database. modeling. Like, oh, it's just like creating a database. So let's just give it to the developer, and the developer will create the content model, and we'll be fine. So that is a really big mistake, not because the developer doesn't know what they're doing. The developer does know from their perspective how to create this, right? But you need a diverse team. Not only do you need the developer to help out, but you need the authors, because they're going to be using this content model day in and day out after the developer is done and has gone to other projects. You need a content strategist that understands content in your organization, but you also need domain experts that can truly understand what are we modeling here? What is this data? What does this content really mean? Obviously, you may involve product managers. You're definitely going to involve a designer, because even though, remember, and one of the principles is keep design, as in UX design, out of a content model, you still need their feedback and their input into the content model, because at the end of the day, that content will be displayed somewhere. Right? So you definitely want to include a designer. And then my recommendation, not because I want to just keep a job, right? But is to have a content modeling architect in the middle that can work with this entire team. But this person is an expert in content modeling and truly understands how to build a good scalable content model that will support single source of truth and can survive the many iterations of redesign that you're going to go through in your website. This is the person that will also play that balance between science and art, right? Not everything in content modeling is just science. There's an art piece, because you've got to make the developer happy. You've got to make your content author happy. You've got to understand the domain that you're trying to model. So this person, to me, is that person that really, really needs to be there to make sure that all of the pieces fit together and you end up with a content model that is enterprise-wide, that will scale as you change and as you add multiple omni-channels or as it's omni-channel delivery, right? So that is principle number 2. Principle number 1, design the model first outside of the headless CMS. Principle number 2, work with a diverse team. If you can just implement those 2, you're going to be way ahead of many, many people. And believe me, the effort will be worth it. Principle number 3 is, when you're modeling, think scalability. How do we scale this model later on as requirements change, as marketing comes to us and says, hey, we need to support this now, we need to support this, without tearing that content model down and throwing it away and rebuilding from scratch? How do we build a good, as I call it, the base of the parent? How do we build that base so it can withstand all changes in the future with minor changes? Of course, you're going to adjust the model here and there, but you're not going to throw it away. And more importantly, you're not going to have to change a lot of code in all your delivery channels. So how do you do that? By thinking scalability. So as an example, let's say we have a blog that we're trying to model. So of course, you can easily say, look, a blog has a title, has a body, has an author, the author has a bio. There's some SEO title description, maybe the no index tag. Maybe there's a media that we want to put at the top. And then also the media has its own SEO, right? So you want to add some of that information. And let's say in the same model, now we want to model a podcast, and we have the name, but we also have some SEO information for that podcast. And I'm simplifying here. Well, yes, you could put this in a headless CMS, and now you can create blog articles and podcast episodes, right? You could do that, no problem. But will this scale? What do I mean by that? Let's say tomorrow marketing says, you know what, now we have blog articles that have multiple authors, and we want to add more information to authors. And by the way, we have not just SEO title and description, but now we have open graph stuff, open graph metadata that we want to add. So you have to add over here, for example, OG title, OG description. But guess what? Also, your podcast here, now you need to go and add OG title, OG description, and do more things. And for example, a podcast may also have, let's make it a little bit more fun, may have a host. Well, what if that host, and let's clean this up a little bit here. What if that host is also a blog author. So you're going to have host name, host bio. Well, guess what? Now you have me as the blog author with my bio, and me as the host and with the host bio duplicated, right? And now I want to add more information. I want to add a picture for the host. Well, that picture could also be used for the author. So you can see how this is not scalable. Doing it this way is not scalable, right? So this is where you want to think, as you're modeling things, think scalability. How can we make it so it's easy to update, easy to maintain? So